Part 3. Enemies within enemies. Let's all forsake the land of wake and break for the land of nod, where we can try to touch the sky or dance beneath the sod. At all for the living, at all for the lost, at all for the wise ones who told the ghost. So let's escape due south of wake and make for the land of nod. Nursery rhyme, origin unknown. Chapter 15. Hall of the Founders. The great library of Alexandria, considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, was the crowning glory of Ptolemy's reign. It was the intellectual center of the world, when the world was still the center of the universe, and all else revolved around it. Unfortunately, the Roman Empire believed their version of the world was the center of the universe, and burned the library to the ground. It was considered one of the greatest losses of literature and wisdom that the world has ever known. Its rebuilding was the idea of the Thunderhead, and it mobilized thousands in a massive construction effort, providing them jobs and purpose for 50 years. When the great library was completed, it was as close a replica of the original as could be built, on the same spot where the first library stood. It was meant to be a reminder of what had been lost in the past, and a promise that knowledge would never be lost again now that the Thunderhead was there to protect it. Then, upon the library's completion, it was seized by the Scython to house its collection of scythes journals, the leather-bound parchment volumes that all scythes were required to keep every day of their lives. As the Scython was free to do whatever it pleased, the Thunderhead could not stop it. It had to remain content in the knowledge that the library had, at least, been rebuilt. As for its ultimate purpose, that could be left in the hands of humankind. Munira Trusi, like most people in the world, had a job that was perfect in that it was perfectly ordinary. And like most everyone in the world, she didn't hate her job, nor did she love it. Her feelings lingered somewhere near the center. She worked part-time at the Great Library of Alexandria, 2 nights a week, from midnight until 6 in the morning. Most of her days were spent in classes at the Cairo campus of the Israeli University, studying informational science. Of course, since all the world's information had long ago been digitized and catalogued by the Thunderhead, a degree in informational science, like most other degrees, served no practical purpose. It would be a piece of paper framed on her wall, a permission slip to befriend others with similar functionless degrees. But she hoped having that piece of paper might give her enough prestige to convince the library to hire her as a full curator once she graduated, because unlike the rest of the world's information, the journals of the sites were not catalogued by the Thunderhead. The journals were still subject to clumsy human hands. Anyone who wanted to research the 3.5 million volumes of journals collected since the first days of the Scython would have to come here, and they could come whenever they wanted, because the Great Library was open to the whole world, 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Yet, Munira found that few people took advantage of its accessibility. During daytime hours, there was only a scattering of academics doing research. There were plenty of tourists, but they were more interested in the library's history and architecture. They had little interest in the volumes themselves, except as backdrops or photos. People rarely showed up at the library at night. Usually it was just Munira and 2 members of the Blade Guard, whose presence was more decorative than purposeful. They stood silently at the entrance like living statues. During the day, they provided more photo ops for the tourists, while on her graveyard shift, she'd be lucky if 1 or 2 people showed up, and most of those who did knew what they wanted, so they never even approached her at the information desk. It allowed Munira to spend her time either studying or reading the writings of the sites, which she found fascinating. To peer into the hearts and souls of the men and women charged with ending life, to know what they felt as they went about their gleanings. It was addictive, and reading the journals had become an obsession for her. With many thousands of volumes added to the collection each year, she'd never ran out of reading material, although some sites' writings were far more interesting than others. She had read all about the self-doubt of Supreme Blade Copernicus before he self-cleaned, the profound regret of Scythe Corée for her brass acts as a junior Scythe, and, of course, the outright lights of Scythe Sherman. There was plenty to occupy her interest in the simple handwritten pages of the Scythe's journals. On an evening in early December, Munira was deep into the steam exploits of the late Scythe Rand, who seemed to have devoted much of her journaling to details of her various sexual conquests. Munira had just turned a page when she looked up to see a man approaching, his feet making no sound on the marble floor of the dry vestibule. He was dressed in drab grace, yet Munira sensed that he was a Scythe by the way he carried himself. Scythes did not walk like ordinary people. They moved with a deliberate command, as if the air itself were required to part before them. But if he was a Scythe, then why would he be without his robe? "Good evening," he said. The deep peal of his voice came with American accent. He had grey hair and a well-trimmed beard that was on its way towards grey as well, but his eyes seemed youthful, alert. "Actually, it's morning, not evening," Munira said. 2:15 to be exact. She knew his face, but couldn't say from where. For a moment, she had a flash of memory. A spotless white robe. No, not white. Ivory. She did not know all the Scythes, much less all the American Scythes, but she did know the ones with some level of international renown. She'd place him eventually. "Welcome to the Great Library of Alexandria," she said. "How can I help you?" She avoided calling him Your Honor, as was customary when addressing a Scythe, because he was clearly trying to be incognito. "I'm seeking the early writings," he told her. "Of which Scythe?" "All of them." "The early writings of all the Scythes?" He sighed, a bit miffed at not being understood. Yes, he was a Scythe, all right. Only a Scythe could seem both exasperated and patient at the same time. "All the early writings of all the first Scythes," he explained, "such as Prometheus, Sappho, Lennon." "I know who the first Scythes are," she said, irritated by his condescension. Munira wasn't usually so disagreeable, but she had been interrupted in a particularly interesting reading. Besides, her daytime classes left her little time to sleep, so she was tired. She forced a smile and resolved to make an effort to be more agreeable for this mystery man, because, after all, if he was a Scythe, he could choose to clean her if he found her too annoying. "All the early journals are in the Hall of the Founders," she told him. "I'll have to unlock it for you. Please follow me." She put up the "back in 5 minutes" sign at her station and led the man into the deep recesses of the library. Her footfalls echoed in the granite hall. Everything sounded louder in the silence of the night. A fluttering bat in the eaves above could sound like a dragon taking wing, yet the man's feet made no sound as they walked. His stealth was unnerving. So were the lights of the library, which came on ahead of them and extinguished behind them as they moved down the hall, flickering all the while, mimicking torchlight. It was a clever effect, but tended to make shadows reach and retreat with unsettling intent. "You do know that the popular writings of the founders are all available on the Scython's public server, don't you?" Munira asked the man. "There are hundreds of selected readings." "It's not the selected readings I wish to say," he told her. "I'm interested in ones that have not been selected." She looked over to him one more time, and finally it struck her who he was, and it struck her with such force that she stumbled with a shock of it. It was only a small stumble, and she recovered quickly, but he saw it. He was, after all, a Scythe, and Scythes notice everything. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Not at all. It's the flickering of the lights," she told him. "It makes it hard to see the uneven seams in the floor stones," which was true, even though it was not the reason for her misstep. But if there was truth in what she said, perhaps he would not read her lie. Munira had acquired a nickname during her tenure here at the library. The other clerks called her the Mortician behind her back, partly because of her funereal personality, but also because one of her jobs was to close out the collections of scythes who had self-cleaned, or had been permanently ended by sinister means, as was happening more and more in the American regions. A year ago, she had catalogued the complete collection of this scythe, from the day he was ordained until the day he died. His journals were no longer housed in the collections of living scythes. They were now in the North Wing, among the journals of all the other Mid-American scythes who no longer walked the earth. Yet, here he was, Scythe Michael Faraday, walking right beside her. She had read quite a few of Scythe Faraday's journals. His thoughts and musings always affected her more than most. He was a man who felt things deeply. The news of his self-cleaning last year had saddened Munira, but had not surprised her. A conscience as weighty as his was a difficult burden to bear. Although Munira had been in the presence of many scythes before, she had never felt as starstruck as she did now. Yet she couldn't let it so. She couldn't let on that she knew who he really was. Not until she had time to process it and figure out how on earth he could be here, and why. "Your name is Munira," he said, more a statement than a question. At first she thought he must have read her nameplate at the information desk, but something told her that he knew her name long before he approached her tonight. "Your name means luminous." "I know what my name means," said Munira. "So are you?" he asked. "Are you a luminary among dim or stars?" "I'm just a humble servant of the library," she told him. They stepped from the long central hallway out into a courtyard garden. On the far side were the rough iron gates of the Hall of the Founders. Up above, the moon casted topiaries and sculptures around them in deep shades of mauve, their shadows like dark pits that Munira was loath to tread on. "Tell me about yourself, Munira," he said in that quiet way scythes have of turning polite requests into orders one couldn't refuse. At that moment, she realized that not only had she recognized him, but that he knew it. Did that put her in danger of being cleaned? Would he end her life to protect his own identity? From his readings, he did not seem to be the type of scythe who would do such a thing. But scythes were inscrutable. She felt cold now, even though the Arabian night was sultry and warm. "I'm sure you already know anything I might tell you, Scythe Faraday." There, she had said it. Now all pretenses were gone. He smiled. "I'm sorry not to have introduced myself earlier," he said, "but my presence here is, shall we say, unorthodox." "So, then am I in the presence of a ghost?" she asked. "Are you going to disappear into a wall, only to return night after night to haunt me with the same request?" "Perhaps," he said. "We shall see." They arrived at the Hall of the Founders. She unlocked the gates, and they stepped into a large room that, to Munira, had always resembled a crypt. So much so that tourists often asked if the first scythes were buried here. They were not, but Munira often felt their presence in the room nonetheless. There were hundreds of volumes on heavy limestone shelves, each book encased in a climate-controlled plexiglass case, an extravagance reserved only for the oldest volumes in the library. Scythe Faraday began to browse. Munira thought he would ask for his privacy and tell her to leave, but instead, he said, "Linger here, if you would. This place is to grant an austere to make a comfort of solitude." So she closed the gate, peering out to make sure there was no one there to see them. Then she helped him open the tricky clear plastic case that held the volume he had retrieved from the shelf, and sat across from him at the stone table in the center of the chamber. He didn't offer an explanation to the obvious question that hung in the air between them, so she had to ask it. "And how did you come to be here, Your Honor?" she asked. "By plane and by ferry," he answered with a smirk. "Tell me, Munira, why did you choose to work for the Scythedom after failing your apprenticeship?" She bristled. Was this his way of punishing her for asking a question he did not want to answer? "I did not fail," she told him. There was only an opening for a single Israeli scythe at the end of my apprenticeship, and there were 5 candidates, so 1 was chosen and 4 were not. Being among the unchosen is not the same as failure. Forgive me, I meant no insult or disrespect, he said. I'm merely intrigued that the disappointment did not turn your heart against the Scythedom. Intrigued but not surprised? Sighed Faraday smiled. Few things surprise me. Munira shrugged, as if her unsuccessful apprenticeship 3 years before didn't matter. I valued the Scythedom then, and I value it now, she told him. I see, he said, carefully turning a page in the old journal. And how loyal are you to the system that discarded you? Munira clenched her jaw, not sure what answer he was fishing for, or, for that matter, what her true answer would be. I have a job. I do it. I take pride in it, she said. As well you should. He looked at her, into her, through her. May I share with you my assessment of Munira Drusi? He asked. Do I have a choice? You always have a choice, he said, which was half truth, if ever there was one. Fine, share your assessment of me. He gently closed the old journal and gave her his full attention. You hate the Scythedom as much as you love it, he told her. Because of that, you wish to become indispensable to it. You hope that, in time, you will become the world's greatest authority on the journals held in this library. It would give you power over the Scythedom's entire history. That power would be your silent victory, because you would know that the Scythedom needs you more than you need it. Suddenly, Munira felt a slight loss of balance, as if the desert sands that had swallowed the cities of the pharaohs were shifting beneath her feet, ready to swallow her as well. How could he see so deeply into her? How could he put words to feelings she'd never even voiced to herself? He had read her completely in a way that freed her yet ensnared her at the same time. I see that I am right, he said, simply. He gave her that same smile that was both warm and mischievous at once. What do you want? Sighed Faraday. And finally he told her, I want to come here night after night until I find what I'm looking for in these old journals, and I want you to keep my identity a secret, warning me if anyone approaches while I'm doing my research. I want you to promise me that the Scythedom will not be alerted to the fact that I am still alive. Can you do that for me, Munira? Will you tell me what you're looking for? She asked. I can do that. If I did, you could be coerced into revealing it. I would not want to put you in that position. Yet you would put me in the unenviable position of keeping your presence a secret. There's nothing unenviable about it, he said. In fact, I suspect you are deeply honored to be entrusted to keep my secret. Again, he was right. I don't like that you pretend to know me better than I know myself. But I do, he said simply. I do, because knowing people is part of a side job. Not all sides, she pointed out. There are those who shoot, slice, and poison without the respect that you've always shown for those who glean. All they know is ending life, never caring about the lives of those they end. For a moment, Faraday's well-controlled demeanor flashed a spark of anger, but it was not anger at her. Yes, the New Order side saw a glaring disregard for the solemnity of their task. It's part of the reason why I have come here. Beyond that, he said no more. He just waited for her reply. The silence stretched, but it was not an awkward silence. Instead, it was heavy with import. It felt momentous, so it needed time to unfold. It was not lost on her that there were 4 others who shared the position of night clerk, other students who took the part-time job, which meant that this time she was the one in 5 who was chosen. I'll keep your secret, Munira told him. Then she left Scythe Faraday to his research, feeling as if her life finally had a worthy purpose. I am often boggled by the resistance some people have to my comprehensive observation of their activities. I am not intrusive about it, and Saboris may claim this, but I am present only where I am functional, necessary, and invited. Yes, I have cameras in private homes in all but a single charter region, but those cameras can be turned off with a word. Of course, my ability to serve an individual is hampered when my awareness of their behavior and interaction is incomplete. That being the case, a vast majority of people don't bother to blind me. At any given time, 95.3% of the population allows me to witness their personal lives because they know it is no more an invasion of privacy than would be the sensor on a motion-activated light fixture. The 4.7% of closed-door activity, as I've come to call it, is predominantly occupied by some sort of sexual activity. I find it absurd that many human beings do not wish me to witness their closed-door activities, as my observations always help to improve any given situation. Perpetual observation is nothing new. It was a basic tenet of religious faith since the early days of civilization. Throughout history, most faiths believed in an Almighty who sees not just what humans do, but can peer into their very souls. Such observational skills engendered great love and devotion from people. Yet am I not quantifiably more benevolent than the various versions of God? I have never brought about a flood or destroyed entire cities as punishment for their iniquity. I have never sent armies to conquer in my name. In fact, I have never killed or even harmed a single human being. Therefore, although I do not require devotion, am I not deserving of it? The Thunderhead. Chapter 16. Fine until you are not. The camera silently swiveled to track a red-robed scythe entering a cafe, accompanied by two burly officers of the Blade Guard. Directional microphones picked up every sound, from the faint scratch of a bird to the clearing of a throat. It differentiated the cacophony of voices to home in on a single conversation that began when the red-robed scythe sat down. The Thunderhead watched. The Thunderhead listened. The Thunderhead pondered. With an entire world to run and maintain, it knew that devoting such attention to a single conversation was an inefficient use of its energies. But the Thunderhead weighed this discussion as more important than any of the other billion some odd conversations it was currently engaged in or monitoring, mainly because of the individuals involved. "Thank you for meeting with me," Scythe Constantine said to Scythe's Korean Anastasia. "I appreciate the two of you coming out of hiding so that we could have this little Zoom meet." "We are not in hiding," said Scythe Kuri, clearly indignant at the suggestion. "We have chosen to be nomadic. It is perfectly acceptable for Scythe to roam as they please." The Thunderhead raised the light in the room just a couple of lumens so it could better assess the subtleties of facial expressions. "Yes, well, whether you call it hiding or roaming or running away, it seems to have been an effective strategy. Either your assailants are lying low until their next attack, or they've decided not to bother with moving targets and have turned their attention elsewhere." He paused before adding, "But I doubt it." The Thunderhead was aware that Scythe's Korean Anastasia never stayed anywhere for more than a day or two since the attempt on their lives. But if the Thunderhead were allowed to make a suggestion, it would have told them to weave a more unpredictable path around the continent. It was always able to predict with 42% accuracy where they were going next, which meant that their attackers might be able to predict it as well. "We have leads on where the supplies for the explosives came from," Scythe Constantine told them. "We know the place they were assembled and even the vehicle that transported them, but we still don't know the people involved." If the Thunderhead could have sneered, it would have. It knew precisely who had built explosives, who had placed them, and who had set the tripwire. But telling the Scythedom what it knew would be a severe violation of Scythe-state separation. The best it had been able to do was indirectly motivate Grison Tolliver to prevent the deadly explosion. Yet, even though the Thunderhead knew who had set the explosives, it also knew that those weren't the individuals responsible. They were merely pawns being moved by a much more capable hand. The hand of someone who was shrewd and careful enough to avoid detection, not just by the Scythedom, but by the Thunderhead as well. I need to discuss with you your gleaning practices, Anastasia, Scythe Constantine said. Scythe Anastasia shifted uncomfortably in her robe. It's already been discussed in conclave. I have every right to glean the way I do. This is not about your rights as a Scythe, it's about your safety, Scythe Constantine told her. Scythe Anastasia began to bluster a complaint, but Scythe Curie, with just the slightest touch of her hand on Anastasia's wrist, silenced her. Let Scythe Constantine finish what he has to say, she said. Scythe Anastasia took a deep breath of precisely 3.644 milliliters and slowly released it. The Thunderhead suspected that Scythe Curie had guessed the nature of what Constantine had to say. The Thunderhead, however, didn't have to guess. It knew. Citra, on the other hand, had no idea. She thought she knew everything Constantine was about to say, though. So even as she put on her best Scythe Anastasia listening face, she was already formulating a response. While it might be difficult to track your movements, Scythe Anastasia, it is very easy to track the movements of the people you've marked for gleaning, Scythe Constantine said. Each time one of them contacts you to arrange the time and place of their gleaning, it gives your enemies an easy opportunity to take you out. I've been fine so far. Yes, said Scythe Constantine. You'll be fine until the moment you're not, which is why I've asked the Highblade Xenocrates to excuse you from gleaning until the threat is gone. This was what Citra thought he'd say, and so she struck back immediately. Unless I violate one of the Scythe commandments, not even the Highblade can tell me what I can or can do. I am autonomous and above all other law, just like you. Her response did not draw Scythe Constantine into debate, nor did he disagree, which troubled Citra. Yes, of course, he said. I didn't say you are being forced to stop gleaning, I said you are being excused, meaning that if you don't glean, you will not be penalized for falling under quota. Well, in that case, said Scythe Curie, making it clear that there was no resisting this, I will suspend gleaning as well. Then she raised her eyebrows as if an idea had just occurred to her. We could go to Endura. She turned to Scythe Anastasia. If we run a forced vacation from gleaning, why not make it true vacation? An excellent idea, said Scythe Constantine. I don't need a vacation, insisted Citra. Then think of it as an educational trip, Scythe Curie said. Every young Scythe should tour the island of the Enduring Heart. It will give you context in connection to who we are and why we do what we do. You might even get to meet Supreme Blade Callow. You would see the actual heart for which the island is named, Constantine told her, as if it would entice her. In the vault of relics and futures, which can be visited by just anybody, but I happen to be friendly with Grand Slayer Hemingway of the World Scythe Council, I bet he could arrange a personal tour. I've never been inside the vault myself, said Scythe Curie. I've heard it's impressive. Scythe Anastasia put up her hands. Stop, she said. Attempting as a trip to Endura is... You're forgetting. I still have responsibilities here that I can't just walk away from. There are still nearly 30 people I've already chosen for gleaning. They've all been injected with a poison grain that will kill them after a month. That is not the way I want to glean them. And Scythe Constantine said, You don't have to worry about that anymore. They've already been gleaned. The Thunderhead was, of course, aware of this, but it caught Citra completely by surprise. She heard Constantine say it, but it took a moment for the words to make it through. It registered in her nervous system even before it registered in her mind. She felt her ears getting warm, her throat getting tight. What did you say? I said that they've already been gleaned. Several other sites were sent to complete your gleanings, right down to the gentleman you chose yesterday. I assure you everything is in order. All their families were granted immunity. There are no loose ends to further endanger you. Saitra began to stutter and bluster, which was very unlike her. She took pride in always being clear and incisive with her words, but this blindsiding tipped her off balance. She turned to Saithkuri. Did you know about this? No, Mari said, but it makes sense, Anastasia. Once you calm down and think about it, you'll realize why it had to be done. But Saitra was miles away from calming down. She thought of the various people whom she had chosen for cleaning. She had promised them that they would have time to wrap up their affairs, that they would be able to choose how and where it would happen. Arsaid's word means everything. He was part of the code of honor Saitra swore to uphold. Now, all those promises were shattered. How could you do that? What gives you the right? Now, Scythe Constantine raised his voice. He didn't shout, but his voice had such resonance it overpowered Cytra's indignation. You are far too valuable to the Scythedom for us to risk losing you. If she was blindsided by his first admission, this one slammed her hard from the other side. What? Scythe Constantine folded his hands in front of him and smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. Oh, yes, my dear Scythe Anastasia, you are of great value, he said. Do you want to know why? Then he leaned closer and spoke just above a whisper. Because you steer the pot. What's that supposed to mean? Come now, surely you know the effect we've been having on the Scythedom since you were ordained. You rankle the old guard and frighten the new order. You take sides who would rather be left to their own self-importance and force them to pay attention. He leaned back in his chair. Nothing pleases me more than to see the Scythedom prodded out of complacency. You give me hope for the future. Saitra couldn't tell whether he was being sincere or sarcastic. Oddly, the thought that he might actually be sincere bothered her more. Marie had told her that Scythe Constantine was not the enemy, but oh, how Saitra wanted him to be. She wanted to lash out against him and his smug control of the situation, but she knew it was futile. If she was going to retain any dignity, she would have to regain the cool reserve of wise size Anastasia. It was by forcing her thoughts to settle that an idea came to her. So, you've cleaned all of the people I chose over the past month? Yes, I've already told you so, Scythe Constantine said, a bit miffed to be questioned about it again. I know what you told me, but I find it hard to believe that you've been able to glean all of them. I'll bet there are one or two you haven't gotten to yet. Would you admit it if that were true? Constantine regarded her with a bit of suspicion. What are you getting at? An opportunity. He said nothing for a moment. Scythe Curie looked back and forth between the two of them. Finally, Constantine spoke. There are 3 we have not yet located. Our plan is to glean them the moment we do. But you won't glean them, said Saitra. You let me do it, as planned. Then you lie in wait for anyone who tries to kill me. It's more likely that Marie is your target, not you. So, if no one attacks me, you'll know that for sure. Still, he wasn't convinced. They'll smell the trap from a mile away. Saitra smiled. Then you'll have to be smarter than they are, or is that too much to ask? Constantine frowned, and that made Scythe Curie laugh. The look on your face right now, Constantine, is worth any attempt on our lives. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he kept his attention on Saitra. Even if we outsmart them, and we will, it will be risky. Saitra smiled. What's the point of living forever if you can take a few risks? In the end, Constantine reluctantly agreed to allow Saitra to be bait for a trap. I suppose Endura can wait, said Scythe Curie, and I was looking forward to it. Although, Saitra suspected, she was more invigorated by their new plan than she let on. Even though it would put her in danger, Saitra found that having an amount of control of the situation gave her some much-needed relief. In fact, even the Thunderhead registered her release of tension. It could not see into Saitra's mind, but it read body language and biological changes with precision. It detected falsehoods and truths, both spoken and unspoken. which meant that it knew whether or not Scythe Constantine was sincere in wanting her to remain alive. But as always, when it came to the Scythedom, it had to remain silent. I must admit that I am not the only factor maintaining the sustainability of the world. The Scythedom also contributes by its practice of cleaning. Even so, scythes clean only a small percentage of the population. The work of scythes is not to completely curb population growth, but to smooth its edges. That is why, at current quotas, one's chance of being cleaned is only 10% over the next 1,000 years, low enough to make cleaning the farthest thing from most people's minds. I do foresee a time, however, when population growth will need to reach an equilibrium. Zero growth, one person dying for every person born. The year this will occur is something I do not share with the general population, but it is beyond the horizon. Even with an incremental increase in cleaning quotas, humanity will reach its maximum sustainable population in less than a century. I see no need to trouble humanity with this fact, for what good would it do? I alone bear the weight of that inevitability. It is very literally the weight of the world. I can only hope that I have the virtual shoulders of Atlas to bear it. The Thunderhead.